like ideally, we'd want to have Spinamp be a place where you're not simply seeing all the music being music NFTs and knowing that, but actually introducing the context of the music NFT scene and the why behind it, and giving people like excitement for not just why they should listen to music, but why they should become a part of the community.
Episode 12 with Aidan from Spinamp. Spinamp's a tool that lets you listen and collect music from your phone or from your computer. Today we talk about a new round that they just announced, Spinamp for Artists, and what it means for music NFTs to grow in the future. We talk about his background in DeFi and what liquidity could look like in a world where everyone's collecting music NFTs. As a reminder, you can collect this episode on investinmusic.xyz. Without further ado, let's get into it. Episode 12 with Aidan from Spinamp. All right, we are back. Aidan, how are we feeling today, man?
Hey, pretty good. Good to catch up and chat to you again, Kiv. How things your side?
Excited for you to be here. Yep, everything's good on my side. I'm really excited to get into it. You know, Spinamp's something that I use every single day. It's a product that I'm really excited about, and I know that we got some big news to announce today. So just getting into it, why don't you tell people a little bit about Spinamp and your background, and then we'll dive into some of the weeds from there.
Yeah, sounds good. So for those that are listening that haven't come across Spinamp before, essentially we are a music NFT aggregator. So we're an app on your phone, you open the app, you install it. You can optionally collect your wallet if you want, but immediately you can start browsing essentially everything that's going on in the music NFT world. So we currently aggregate like 20 different platforms, as well as probably 50 to 100 individual smart contracts from different artists that are experimenting with their own contracts, and put them all into this like single music app where you can start to listen and browse and explore and discover music coming out of the Web3 movement. You can also go and like collect those NFTs. We've aggregated collection. We're still working on getting that minting happening on mobile, but on the web app, you can do that. And really the purpose behind Spinamp is to make everything that's happening in the music NFT world really easily accessible and explorable to kind of everyone, and to be like a key app both for people that are already in the community to kind of stay in touch with the community and to listen to their music and build their collection, as well as for people that are new to the community, and really for it to be an entry point potentially to the music NFT world.
Yeah, it's really been a great way for me just to enjoy my music NFTs. You know, I use it in my car all the time, streaming in when I'm going to, you know, the gym or when I'm driving and whatnot. And I think the one thing that I really love about Spinamp is how convenient it is. You know, I think that you mentioned the word aggregator, which I want to get into in this conversation, but at least for me, Spinamp's really been my go-to way to just listen to my music NFTs. And I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit more about what your intention was building Spinamp in the first place.
Totally. So maybe I can give a bit of background. So I've been in the Web3 scene for a while. My background's in math, computer science, engineering, and I used to do a lot more lower level work, some DeFi stuff, some interoperability stuff. But in time, I wanted to shift towards more consumer-facing products. So I've always had an interest in music and in building like consumer products and interactive media. And so Spinamp was an opportunity to kind of dive back into building those kinds of products and exploring that world. Actually, before Spinamp, I had been running a studio that was doing projects on behalf of friends and clients, and a friend of mine wanted to spin up a music NFT platform based on the African music world, which is still live and running today, called Noise. But essentially a follow-on from that project is that I'd been building part of this music NFT platform, but I wasn't really that familiar with the artists, even though I was actually working on the project, which was kind of ironic. And I realized that like a big reason for that is that it wasn't easy to just open up my phone and start browsing and listening to artists. And at the time when Spinamp was started, that was true for most of the music NFT platforms in the space. And so I spent like a week or two hacking together a little app that aggregated a music player across them all, started using it, started sharing it with a few people. And as soon as like the first few people I shared it with started using it, they all kind of really loved it and started to get value out of it. And like we saw almost immediate like product market fit from day one with the people that were trying it out. And so I decided to shift more of my time into the project and like essentially move over to building Spinamp as kind of the main project. And so this was about just over a year ago when Spinamp started and when this whole transition happened.
Yeah, and it's so important too, because for someone like myself who's collecting a lot, being able to listen to my NFTs from Sound, Catalog, Decent, Lens, Zora, you know, you name it, all in one place is so convenient. Because I think in a lot of ways, you know, the music landscape right now has really just been very experimental. You know, I think we've gone through a couple different cycles in terms of where people are minting their music. And although we're seeing more standards now, I think that Spinamp is really well positioned just to capture whatever the future, you know, minting experience looks like, whether it be across multiple apps in the same way that we have a Spotify, Apple Music, you know, Amazon Music today, or, you know, whether it aggregates to one platform. I feel like Spinamp's just been great about recognizing that there are going to be many places to listen to music on chain, and we need one central place to be able to listen to it all.
Totally. That makes sense. And like, we've been thinking about that a lot, not just in terms of kind of listening to music, but, because the Web3 music scene is so experimental, people are not just experimenting with like traditional Spotify releases, but there's a range of other ways in which people experiment with release, whether it's like generative music and on-chain collections and different ways of maybe the content is still music, but different ways in which how the NFTs work, or they have some kind of governance and community nuances around them. And so finding a way to really expose all of those kind of interesting experiments to the wider world is part of our mission. That's been up.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier too, like the Web3 music movement, and I think it's been really powerful for me in LA to open Spinamp on my phone when I'm with my friends who know nothing about NFTs, and they're just like, "Oh, what app is that?" And like, "Oh, this is Spinamp." And then I mention them like, "Yeah, every single song that's on here is an NFT." And when you say that out loud, it's very powerful, because I think in a lot of ways, when you look at your music NFT collection on OpenSea, it's next to a bunch of other JPEGs and other profile pictures and membership passes and whatnot, and it's very hard to contextualize and really understand what it means for songs to be, NFTs under the hood. And I think Spinamp does a great job of just helping to visualize that there really is, a vibrant ecosystem of artists and songs out there. And now there's actually one place to be able to listen to all of those.
Totally. And I think contextualizing is like a big critical thing for Spinamp, because aggregation is also all about context. If you look at the way that people, discover music and become passionate about music, so much of that is often because of the context in which they discovered it. And so contextualizing everything is critical for Spinamp. And it's also like part of our long-term roadmap and vision is like improving at that. If I think about like all of the people that I know in the music NFT scene, almost all of them probably got into music NFTs either from Twitter or through discussions with someone like you who brought them into the scene. They didn't kind of get into the scene just by installing a piece of software and getting guided into it. And so that's great. It's great to kind of get introduced to a scene through like personal collections and connections on Twitter, but it's also limiting in a way where like ideally we'd want to have Spinamp be a place where you're not simply seeing all the music being music NFTs and knowing that, but actually introducing the context of the music NFT scene and the why behind it, and giving people like excitement for not just why they should listen to music, but why they should become a part of the community. And so a part of that is like, how can we actually acclimatize someone into the culture of music NFTs and the culture of collecting music through their interactions with the app and through like software and scalable product.
I have a lot of thoughts there on where the future of trading music NFT goes and where Spinamp is positioned to help capture that value. But I want to start from a place of, let's help people understand kind of the life cycle of Spinamp. I know we have some exciting news to talk about today, but I guess as you mentioned, you started this kind of as more or less like a weekend hackathon project, right? Like something that you were just excited about and that you wanted to build up. Can you walk me through Spinamp at the beginning in terms of how you were thinking about it to, the last 6 to 8 months and this team you've really built around it and how it's kind of turned into a little bit more of a formalized project and company?
Totally. So if we start back, say, a year ago, as you said, it was about a hackathon project, took a few days and got live. And, past that point, started sharing with a few people, got a lot of positive feedback, started using it myself heavily, and found like this was really valuable for me personally. And so that like continued to motivate me to want to keep building it. Similarly, some of the teams that I'd been, and engineers and product people that I'd been working with were also in the position to kind of build something new. So I decided to bring them all onto the project and to kind of accelerate the development and growth of the product. And so, we grew the team pretty quickly initially with this intention like that we can start to build something solid, and that there's this growing music NFT space and there's a clear need for this kind of tool. I'd say over the first, 4 to 6 months, it involved like building out a more polished music player, better experiences, more aggregation. And probably like 4 months in is when I think we did the first launch of our infrastructure layer. So I haven't really brought that up yet, but a big part of Spinamp is also that our infrastructure is open. We have like a lot of open source repositories around. We have an API, and Zora they ran this hackathon last year, building on their API, and we participated in that and also released the Spinamp API for that hackathon. We got a lot of good feedback from there. We got a lot of teams that started building on that. And so in addition to having this consumer app as like one of the pillars of the project and being an aggregator for consumers, we realized we also have this infrastructure and this aggregator to be like building new technology that anyone in the music Web3 world can use themselves. And so that became like another, I think, guiding piece of our project. And like what motivates us is also not just building great stuff for consumers, but building tools for the Web3 music movement at large for collectors, for artists, and even for other like founders and products in the space. And since then, there've been like 2 or 3 other projects that have built on top of our APIs and become like longer term product as well. And that point, I think 4 months in was the starting point to that. I'd say like probably 6 to 7 months in is when we kind of felt like we became quite mature around like having the baseline usability kind of there and in place. And so that was a few months ago. And now with the last few months, I think we've been really thinking hard about what is actually like now the longer term vision for the project. Where do we want to see ourselves go before the end of the year? And like many years down the line, as the project continues, what's the like longer term vision for how Spinamp has a place, not just in the Web3 music movement, but ideally in the music industry and scene overall, as we all hope that the music NFT movement grows to become more significant in the wider world.
Yeah. And I think this is where our conversation started to get a lot more serious too, because it went from me just kind of listening to my NFTs on my phone as a fun, way to experience them, to actually thinking more about what is Spinamp's position in the wider market. How do you think about this tech layer that you're building on sort of the protocol side and on the IP side? And then more broadly, just how do you think about, collecting music NFTs at large? And I know that this kind of led into a conversation that I'm excited to talk more about here, but I'd love for you to maybe share some of the recent work you guys have been doing, and then any of the news that you're happy to announce today on the podcast.
So I mean, I think recently we have been like refining our product and our vision, and I think there's a few different pillars that we see as really important for us to build next and to like grow the music NFT scene, both for Spinamp and for the wider market. And so and I think they grow out of some of our initial core principles for how we built Spinamp. So if you look at the app today, one of the key things you may notice is there's a big element of using Spinamp that involves like liking tracks, following artists, creating playlists, and really curating your own collection. If you remember like how people often used to collect music, or rather not collect, but have their own music collection in the past, whether it was CDs, whether it was records, whether even it was iTunes, and the torrenting scene, most people that I know, they would like download or buy music that they like. They'd organize their own collections, and they have, due to that, a sense of care and ownership over what they have. And if you contrast that to something like Spotify or the traditional streaming models today, where you have access to everything, and it's a very algorithmically decided what content you have. The content is organized and shuffles behind the scenes all the time. You lose that aspect of feeling like the collection is yours. And so that's something we really wanted to preserve, not just through music NFTs, but through the entire design of Spinamp. And so when you open the app, you have those tools at your disposal to like curate and control your collection and share that with others. And so a big part of our roadmap going forward, I think, is to be to like double down and enhance that, because there's so much like symbiotic value in that type of experience with the core purpose of music NFTs, which is, again, about having a direct connection to the music and the artist. And so what we're exploring now is really how we can build better features for people to curate and share their own collection. If you go and look at like how people share on-chain NFTs today, as you said, back to the analogy of like a wallet where everything's mixed together and there's static lists of things, there's nothing great. There's some things like Gallery as an example, where you can go and create like a nice gallery of your like video NFTs, and starting points to that in a few other apps. But we really think like music necessitates something like special there, and places that we're drawing inspiration from are all those past analogies of like record collections, CD collections, and iTunes that I mentioned. And so we're hoping to see a lot more of evolution there, both to give those tools to collectors, and then for them to be in place to allow new people, when they get introduced to the movement, to get to that same mindset of actually caring about their music collection and taste once again, because we want to shuffle them to that same mindset that's like very compatible with the music NFT mindset. So that's like one big pillar of our features going forward. And then that ties into the next one, which is, artists. I think up until now, Spinamp has been built as a tool primarily for fans and collectors. Of course, we have a lot of artists that use the app because a lot of artists listen to each other and are part of the music NFT in that way. But there's not a clear story around why should an artist join Spinamp and start to do stuff there. And so like one of the things to announce today is like a big part of our features coming out of the next few months, I think, is going to be Spinamp for Artists, where we're really releasing a bunch of new tools and experiences for artists to come in and use Spinamp and feel like Spinamp is a tool for them that can help with them, how they engage with their audience, how they express themselves, and how they show off their profile and how they distribute their music. And that ranges from, stuff you'd see in a typical straightforward music app, like being able to modify your profile, create a description, control your tracks to like other more interesting ways of empowering artists to express themselves further down the line. And so along with that, we're talking to a few artists also like work together with them to help build initial tools for them such that they feel like Spinamp is going to be a great place that they want to share their profile and eventually extend that out to the whole music NFT community. So we have an additional set of tools for artists to use that really artists can also now have additional places to help grow the music NFT movement.
I love that. Yeah, and I think on my end too, the Spinamp skins are something that immediately stood out to me. You know, like when I was browsing through and I started to notice some of those skins popping up, it was really cool because it alluded back to like the MySpace eras, but basically just being able to better customize the listening experience around your individual tracks. I think Spinamp for artists is interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, you know, you have music typically as an artist in Web3 that's across multiple platforms. And I think right now it's very difficult to find one place to contextualize all of your songs across all these different platforms. But I'm optimistic that with Spinamp for artists, you know, you can tell a compelling narrative around my songs that are on Catalog, my songs that are on Sound, my songs that are on Lens, and really help people understand the full picture of all of the content that you have out there on chain and hopefully give them the best way possible to listen to as much music that you've released on chain as possible.
Exactly. And it also becomes a place for like an artist to express themselves. That's why, you know, we've had themes from very early and a lot of artists have gone and created their own custom themes in the app. And with Spinamp for artists, we're going to be releasing a bunch of new tools around how artists can use the theme functionality and like really open up that theming. And like one of the analogies there is if you look at like a platform like Bandcamp is an interesting one because Bandcamp was like somewhere in the middle between being an aggregated listening platform like Spotify. But when you go to an individual artist page on Bandcamp, it looks almost like their own website. And if you don't know, if you're not familiar with Bandcamp's layout, you would think that this is the artist's website. And it essentially also allows them to, just like many artists would go and create their own website to express themselves, allow them to embody any of the things, the context and the aesthetics of their artwork in their profile. And so that's something that we're also looking to enhance in the same way through Spinamp for artists. In you know, themes as one example, but many other tools in time as we improve and roll out more features there.
And so you mentioned that you started this out as a hackathon. I imagine that this has grown into something that's larger than yourself. Can you talk a little bit more about, you know, the Spinamp team and how it's grown and how you guys are able to kind of build this product out to the way that it's grown to today?
Yeah. So the team has scaled up where it started off a year ago, just myself over a few days hacking it together. And we quickly scaled up to 3 or 4 people, bringing on some engineers and product people that I've worked with. Now we're at about 5 or 6 people. And I think we have a solid, well-rounded team. I think we're not trying to scale too hard because we're, you know, in this in-between point between like still iterating on product market fit and building out tools for our users and our community versus fully, you know, opening the scaling and growth. And so at this stage, I think it's still important for us to continue to be really agile and scrappy and to be able to ship fast and iterate fast. And so that's the team that we're at. And I imagine, you know, potentially further down the line, it'll make sense to scale up both the team and our marketing and our audience. But that's where we're at today. And I think the important thing for us has been that we've got a solid team as well as like a solid, sustainable, longer term plan and resources to be able to you know, keep iterating and keep really refining Spinamp to the point where it can really be a beacon for the music NFT movement. And so as part of that, another thing that I think we can announce today is we, a few weeks ago, we did a fundraising round for Spinamp. And of course, your fund, Coop Records, was one of the main investors in the round. And so, yeah, happy to announce we did that raise. And we now have some funding runway to keep going and keep iterating for the music NFT movement. We can talk a little bit more around about the round. There'll probably also be some, you know, posts and stuff that get into more details. But yeah, just wanted to announce that and yeah, definitely appreciate yourself participating in the round, especially being like a key player in the music NFT movement and a core beacon of the community. And I think with our raise, we were very careful about deciding like why we were raising and how we wanted to raise and who was involved, so that we could maintain complete alignment between our investment interests and our product and community interests. And I think we've really achieved that like super smoothly and successfully, thanks to like how the round turned out. And so, yeah, really excited to see how, you know, that can help us evolve going forward over the next year.
Totally. I want to give a quick shout out here to Blockchain Brett, who is the one that kind of put the Spinamp fundraise on my radar. I think at that point, me and him had been using the app basically every single day, making playlists, sharing tracks and whatnot. And he came to me and he's like, hey, I've been talking with Aidan. It sounds like we're going to do a fundraise. So I think that in a lot of ways, that round would not have been possible without him. But I'm also really, happy and thankful to be a part of a round that's with people who are so close to the ground floor on this. Because I think in so many ways, when you look at, yeah, go ahead. I mean, take that where you want. But I think that that's like something that's so important to where this fundraise came from.
Totally. And then I think, same, I'll duplicate that shout out to Brett. I think like for myself and our team, we weren't even at the point where we were like, okay, should we actually do a fundraise, like do this? And like, I think his influence definitely helped make the round come together from my side and like motivating us to like really push into scaling up and growing and like getting to this longer term runway that we have together. And so we've got a bunch of other people in the round that, you can read about offline. But I think, we're really hoping that through this, we can become this like shelling point for a lot of the music NFT community to feel like Spinamp has their interests at heart and is really building towards what is going to best create value for the community and build tools and functionality that are on the line for what people really want.
Yeah, and to your point about resources too, I think the interesting position now is that I see a lot of teams that feel pressured to monetize very early on in their life cycle because they need to make money to be able to pay themselves to keep building the product in the first place. And I think one of the very nice things about taking on funding is that you can almost give yourself a little bit of time to figure out what you want to try and monetize in the first place, where you're not trying to go out and sell a bunch of shit and you're not trying to get people to pay for a product in a very expensive way. I think like with this round, it kind of felt like, at least with my intention, I was like, hey, I love using Spinamp. I think it's a really amazing experience. I think there's still a lot of work that we need to do to establish the music NFT market as a whole. But I'm optimistic that with this funding, you and your core team can start to think about how do we put ourselves in a position where in a year, 2 years from now, when this hopefully all takes off, now Spinamp's in a position to be able to capture and monetize versus having to do that a lot sooner in its life cycle, which I think can often be something that ends up killing a product before it finds, the true momentum that it's really meant to achieve.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, in fundraising circles and on Twitter, you often see debates between like, projects and founders that go full bootstrap versus projects and founders that take on funding and investment. And I think like a critical factor there is really about how does the kind of product get into the market and become monetized. And in the case of movements like the music NFT movement, where it's early, it's going to take time to come alive and really explode. And there's a lot of network effects involved in the value of these products, both being, a music NFT is a social thing, and social networks have network effects that only come alive at certain points in scale. The product itself, we aggregate a lot of platforms, and so there's this, like, to have a lot of music, that only happens at scale. And so because we have long time scales and durations around when expenses occur versus when eventual monetization may happen, I felt like this was the right kind of project that would actually get a lot of value from external funding. I think the other factor of it is like we really wanted to involve the community, and we didn't raise from yourself and Brett and our other funders because we just wanted to have funds for a long-term runway and for these kind of financial considerations. We raised because we wanted the community involved, and we considered like yourselves to really be the like key beacons in the community. And in some ways, that's even more important and relevant than any of the financial stuff. Is that like this is a way to, as a starting point, bring the community into having ownership and like feeling like they have a part in how Spinamp evolves and where it goes.
Right. And I think something that's really important there too is that I see a world in which people are collecting tons and tons of music NFTs through Spinamp, and I think one thing that we didn't talk about a lot is that when people ask me, how do you show off your music NFTs? What's the way that you like experience them? Like I can put my PFP as my profile picture on Twitter, yada, yada. What's the same for music? It's really refreshing for me to be able to go open a mobile app and stream a song and then show people that I own that song. And if I really like it, that I can collect it. And I think one thing that's really important to highlight here is that I think Spinamp has stayed very true to the narrative of how music NFTs scale, where in the future, I don't think you're going to be listening to music on like OpenSea. I think it's a lot more likely that you're going to be listening to it in a Spotify-like experience. And instead of pressing the like button, you're pressing the collect button. And I think for me as an investor, I've wanted that vision to be true for so long. I mean, I saw that so clearly from the beginning of me collecting music NFTs. And I feel like Spinamp was one of the very first teams to really, go fully into that belief that you can listen to this music for free. Come and listen to it on the app. You don't need to buy this NFT to listen to the song. And if you like it and you want to go deeper on that relationship, you collect the song. And I'd love to kind of hear about how you think about the future of what music NFTs look like at scale and how Spinamp maybe fits into that vision.
Yeah, totally. So I suppose to follow on from that, I think, as you say, if we contrast Spinamp to other platforms like OpenSea, the critical piece is when you come to participate in the music NFT movement, there's a relationship with the creator, with the artist himself. Before we had this like profile picture collection style NFT movement, there was like a burst of artist-driven image NFTs, and they like a lot of them were successful. If you look at like Beeple and some of those similar era of the first-ish wave of NFTs, they were really artist-centric. They were centered around creators and like the creator economy. And that's something we've almost lost in experiences like OpenSea and most of the other NFT aggregators. And so for Spinamp, sure, we aggregate everything, but I think the critical thing is actually we aggregate stuff with the context of like who's creating them, who the creators are, who the artists are. And when you're coming to listen to music on Spinamp, you know who the artist is, and you may even just follow that particular artist. And so it's not so much about the like technical NFT terms about NFTs and collections. What really matters is having it all contextualized in a particular artist. And I think that's one of the key ingredients that is important for scaling the movement, because when people go and listen on Spotify, there's a mix between different how people engage with Spotify. Some people, they just go to Spotify Discover Weekly, they push play and they listen to everything. They run through a bunch of songs. They don't even hear the musicians are, and that's great. That works well for a lot of people. But I think there's a significant portion of the music listening market where they use that as a way of actually discovering artists. And so maybe they listen to Spotify Weekly, but then they go and discover the artist, and that's the point of like starting to kick off a relationship with that artist. And I think we're kind of all in on that particular kind of way of listening to music. And so having the NFTs and the music NFT movement contextualized within artists is how we, I think, really can enable that kind of experience. And so when we think about the first time someone downloads and installs Spinamp and gets onboarded to the music NFT world, having their experience contextualized in all of these things that I'm talking about around actually learning about the artists, being able to follow them, and being able to see this, hey, this is a starting point to a relationship, as opposed to just looking at the NFTs or the not even just the music, is a key factor, both in like how I see Spinamp differentiating from the other things in the NFT world, as well as how Spinamp can be a tool that the music NFT movement itself can use to become more accessible to the wider world.
There's a couple places I want to take this conversation. I'd say on that point, being able to let people know that by collecting songs, you can go deeper on the relationship with your favorite artist than you could traditionally. I think that that's a really exciting rabbit hole to dive down. I mean, you think about tokenized group chats, you think about these fan clubs, you think about being able to use your NFTs for access to tickets to shows and whatnot. And I think that there's a lot of pieces that can be connected together there. And so I want to just kind of like help really frame this in people's mind that when it comes to something like Spinamp, the most obvious iteration of it is saying, hey, connect your wallet, listen to your music NFTs. If you like a song, collect it. But then I think if you zoom out a bit, the word aggregator is really important here, because it's not only about collecting the songs, right? There's also other ways to be able to use these NFTs to have better experiences with these artists. And I think one thing that I'm excited about is that, Spinamp's philosophy around building is something that was really, really appealing to me. I see a lot of times, especially in like the creator economy and early stage music companies, where companies just try and build everything themselves. They have every single tool that they build from the ground up. The entire experience is kind of kept within their ecosystem. And while I can understand that philosophy, I think that what you and I have seen from DeFi is that this notion of composability and being able to really open source your tools and allow people to build on top of what you're building, and then you being able to connect the dots between other pieces. There's something so powerful about that philosophy. And so I guess turning that into a question, how do you think that your early experience within DeFi helped to shape the way that you've been building Spinamp?
Yeah, no, that's a great experience. And I think like my early experiences in DeFi were living through seeing that composable world emerge. And so seeing, one building block at a time, each new DeFi project comes alive and they start connected together. And we eventually get to something where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I think like a big part of my motivation for Spinamp was driven, in building a decentralized music play and decentralized ecosystem. So the NFTs are one aspect of the product and everything we're talking about, but of course blockchains and decentralization are there for other reasons. A big kind of topic that I've discussed with a lot of people is when you go and create your whole music collection on Spotify or on any particular app, it's locked within that app. and the state is locked there. It's not accessible to other things. If you look at what Spotify's been doing with their APIs lately, they're becoming more restricted rather than more open. And so the decentralization aspect of it is something that is important both for users so that they feel like they actually have a sense of ownership over their collection. If I go and spend weeks creating playlists and following artists and things and really curating myself on Spinamp, I don't want to be in a position where I don't feel like I have ownership of that. And so making sure that the data that you curate and build up your identity with is open is a critical piece of that, both for ownership, but secondarily back to the DeFi question for composability. And so, when we started spinning with aggregation, we were aggregating a bunch of different music NFT platforms. And so that was, one step already of a form of composability. Similarly, when we released our SDKs and APIs, having other platforms built on top of them is another example of how we can enhance composability. And then when we think about like a longer term vision going forward and our longer term roadmap, that's something we're again doubling down on and thinking about like what is the right thing to build to further grow the composable world. And so like one thing I can talk about there, which I'd be curious to hear your perspective on, is like how does social fit into this whole experience? NFTs are a big differentiator also because they're social. And there's actual social NFT platforms like Lens as an example. But before we even get to that, NFTs themselves are inherently social because you're caring about other collectors. They are financial assets and kind of a form of finance is a social technology. And so the base layer of what we're building on is inherently social. On top of that, we have social platforms like Lens and some others that further enhance and enable social dynamics with NFTs. And the context around the music NFTs is social because the collectors and the relationship that the collectors are creating with artists ends up forming these social circles. And so like I really feel like the next iteration of where we imagine things could go with Spinamp and with music NFTs is to really double down on that social aspect of them and expose that context to people that are coming into using them. Similarly, how I was talking about, like when someone new that's not familiar with the music NFT scene downloads Spinamp, they get to see all the music, they get to see all the context of the artists. That's one piece of it, but really what they're really doing is like joining a new social network, joining a new friend group, joining a new collector group. And so having them feel like they have a path to become part of a community and make connections within the community is another critical piece, I think, of this whole puzzle of what we need in order to really unlock the next phase of the music NFT movement.
Yeah, and I think that there's a whole conversation around on-chain social apps, platforms like Lens, as you mentioned. I think for me, recognizing that there's a value in having vertical specific social experiences is really important too, because what your identity looks like on Spotify is very different from what your identity looks like on Instagram or Twitter. And if we use some analogs there, I would compare Lens more to Twitter, and I think that I would consider Spinamp more close to whatever a social version of Spotify would be. And right now there's really not like a social version of Spotify. It's something that I've actually long wanted to see. But just to say that when I find songs that I really love, I typically share it to my Instagram story, but it doesn't really get received well because it's just kind of a different medium for that. But I think if there is a way to build, an identity around yourself, specifically relative to your music collecting habits, I think it opens up a lot of interesting behaviors. One of those being, and this is a great example of composability, the way that Spinamp thinks about curator fees. And so we've talked about this before, but on Sound, basically if you share a link to a song and someone collects it, you can get 5% of whatever that mint is. And something really cool that Spinamp's done is if you make a playlist on Spinamp and someone listens to that song through your playlist and they end up collecting it, you get that curator fee automatically. You don't have to go out of your way to copy that referral link, send it to someone, make sure that they go through it. It's almost like Spinamp's role there is making that, really valuable piece of the puzzle, which is curator fees, very convenient and accessible for someone who's brand new to the system, where if I just make a playlist and I share it with someone or I make a playlist and it starts to trend, there's a real opportunity for me to actually earn, income in the form of ETH just simply for being a fan of music. I think that that's such a powerful philosophy, and I'd love for you to maybe highlight more kind of what that looks like as a builder, and then how people should be thinking about that for what Spinamp can unlock for them as a listener and a collector moving forward.
Yeah, so I definitely echo that in that like there's no great social music platform. I think in the past we've seen waves of platforms come and go, whether it was like SoundCloud and the different mixtape and kind of radio platforms. And I think like we've seen platforms like that grow and fade, and streaming apps have still maintained dominance. But my perspective there, it definitely feels like music NFTs add additional glue to enhance the social layer, and that it's certainly worth like another attempt at scaling and bringing a social music platform to life. And we're really hoping that the dynamics that the music NFT movement involves will be an important glue, an important piece that really allows a new social music movement to take off, and like Spinamp potentially to be the social Spotify as an example of that. I was just going to follow on, like talking about what does that mean for people that are joining Spinamp, collecting music, listening to music. I think the social features within Spinamp are quite limited today. I'd say we do have feeds of how people are behaving with their wallets, what they're minting, what they're not minting, but I wouldn't say they're like super well designed. And the social layer there's still this like abstract or like barrier between when you go and look at someone's, if I go to your profile on Spinamp and I look at what you've been minting, I think that's quite powerful because I can see what you've been minting and what you've been doing, but it also has this like voyeur aspect to it. And that's one kind of experience, but I think like an experience where there's more interactivity and there's more communication in the social layer, I think is going to be an interesting thing to explore. And so that's like one kind of area that's on our mind in terms of like how we can really make the social layer something that the everyday Spinamp user can actually engage with and can play with.
I think the biggest question that I've had around this is how financial the social experience is for music NFTs. It's something that you and I have talked about a lot, but I think in my mind, I see there being a world where your music NFT collection is very similar to the way you look at your tokens on Zerion, where you have a portfolio, you can see that your music NFTs are worth this amount. You can see that this one is up 20% today, that the floor price on this one is a lot higher than the other one. And then you have this other kind of ballpark, which is to say that maybe we just end up extracting the financial part of it away from it entirely. And it's just like, hey, if I'm just double tapping a song and collecting it, that's kind of what the experience is. And I guess I'd be curious to hear your take on where you see kind of the social experience around collecting going, because from there I have a couple prodding questions and thoughts I'd love to explore, but maybe just from like a foundational level, do you see the social experience around music becoming more or less financial in the future?
Yeah. I think my this is something I go back and forth with, week by week as different realizations come and go. But I think like the point that I'm at now is I think there's like a hybrid between the two of those where we can see it becoming more financial, but that financiality is grounded in the social layer. Specifically, if you consider looking at examples of how artists are collaborating with each other, often in the music NFT scene, we've seen artists collaborate with each other to release NFTs, artists collaborating with each other to build a community. If you look at what like Rio is doing with Loners and to what some other communities are doing, they're forming social circles and communities that are also producing essentially like financial products and experiences together. And the social layer and the financial layer are really kind of tightly bound. And the social layer is often used as a tool to make money for artists to find success. And similarly, the financial layer is a tool that often is used to help artists form collaboration and form contracts and agreements and so on with each other. And so I think exploring those in a symbiotic way where the financialization of it all is really there to enable collaboration and enable better social relationships and communities is where I'm at there. What that does mean in practice is, does that imply there's going to be a shift away from these like prized one-of-one style NFTs towards like fully open, everyone collects everything kind of NFTs? That spectrum from really scarce, really expensive NFTs to really abundant, really cheap NFTs, I think ties directly into how we will see the financial layer help to create social communities and social contexts. And I think we want to explore across that spectrum. And as a music NFT movement, we have been exploring there. But it does feel to me like getting closer towards NFTs, enabling a social layer and like slightly more abundance of NFTs to be able to enable that does feel like the kind of more likely direction to explore in the short to medium term.
Yeah, and I think for me too, I agree with your statement there that over time, I think songs are going to become more abundant and cheaper to collect. I think that at scale, most music NFTs are anywhere between $1 to $5 a pop. You're probably buying it with a credit card and you're buying it for less than $1 in gas fees. But I think the interesting part to recognize here is that just because all those songs are abundant actually makes the earlier, more limited and scarce NFTs more valuable. And I think one thing that's been something I'm hoping to see, and it's a lot easier said than done, so I don't take this lightly, would be if someone comes to my collection, I have thousands of music NFTs. How is someone supposed to know which ones are the quote unquote most valuable in that collection? If you go to OpenSea right now, what you see is that they give you a floor price based on whatever the cheapest listed one is. And so you have a song from a year ago that has a supply of 10 that someone decided to list for fun at 100 ETH. And then in your portfolio on OpenSea, it's like, oh, you have 100 ETH music NFT. That's not real. You know what I mean? I think that the biggest thing I'm trying to figure out is how do you actually show the true market value for these collectibles, you know, the value that was paid for them most recently, the total volume that they've had, and how do you help to tell a story that if someone wants to look at my portfolio and say, oh, you've got some real gems in there. Right now, basically what that requires is that you have to be deeply ingrained in the scene. You have to have remembered these cultural moments that happen, know who these artists are, know who they are within the movement, you know that this was a season 1 NFT, that this was, 10x of floor price, that the mint price back then was 0.1, but now it's 0.005. There's way too many variables. And I think something that I would really like to see is like, just what is my portfolio worth? If I had to just take like a top down look at it in the same way that I would try and look at like the value of my Pokemon card collection, how do I know that like in the same way a Charizard's worth like thousands of dollars now, it's like, what does that look like for music NFTs? And I still think there's quite a big design space around, to your point about contextualization of showing like, what are these NFTs actually worth and how do they sit within the wider framework of this kind of collective movement as a whole?
Yeah, so maybe to start to answer that, I'll talk about like DeFi itself, because I think we can learn a lot from like DeFi and finance in terms of answering that question. And I think like one critical thing that is important to understand when it comes to finance and DeFi is liquidity. People are looking at prices all the time. People are looking at token supplies, but really one of the most important, it's not even more important than price in most markets, is liquidity. And that's something like the average trader doesn't actually understand liquidity. What that means is they may be looking at a price, but not realizing that that price is completely dependent on how supply and demand changes. And so most of the prices in like a lot of financial markets, if they're not like sufficiently deep or well established, are basically subjective. They may be like, if you look at say a ERC20 token in number 500 in coin market cap, maybe there's a few hundred people that have established liquidity for the token. But as soon as those people are not active or not paying attention, or those have been used up, then the demand changes entirely, and you've almost shifted away from like an environment where there is liquidity to one where the liquidity is completely unclear. And music NFTs, even more so than traditional NFTs, take these problems and they amplify them to like the extreme, because liquidity in the NFT space is completely personal and completely contextual. As you say, some of the NFTs you've collected back in the day, maybe like say that some of Daniel Allen's first NFTs, especially the catalog one of ones, they may have never even sold. And so by any kind of price metric, it's impossible to say what they're worth. But you may also know that like, hey, if you wanted to sell this to Brett, he would be super down to pay 5 ETH, 10 ETH, 20 ETH for it. And so there's this like hidden liquidity that may exist because of some like unique social relationship that you have, because of some like off-chain context, and because of some like understanding of the community and understanding of the subculture that like is not really exposed through market activity. And so I think that essentially leads to almost like a fundamental challenge in like, how do we want to represent liquidity within Spinamp to users? Because like all of those aspects of liquidity in the example of like the catalog track that you're sending to Brett, it's like subjective and it's also personal. Like if someone else owned that track, they may not have access to that liquidity. And so again, when you talk about like trading of music, music is also a personal thing. Like when I make a mixtape and I send it to a friend, if we take that analogy of like, hey, me selling a music NFT to a friend, the person that I'm trading with, I may be like trading with them in a different way at a different price, because it's like the subjective element to my trade. And so even if we did have, like pricing numbers for NFTs on the market, it may be the case that people want to trade their NFTs with others for non-purely financial reasons, because there's some social element to it, or some like interaction that they want to, and communication they want to make with the person that further adds ambiguity to like what the value of the thing is. And so that definitely makes me reluctant to like go and say, oh, we're going to come up with some algorithm that aggregates your music NFTs and gives people a hint to what it is, because the level of subjectivity that we have in the market today is like so high that any kind of algorithm is essentially going to be misrepresenting the value of your collection to you and to others. Having said that,
That's right.
I think there's ways in which we can represent some reality to people. Like, back to liquidity, if you go and look at the depth chart of a price on a DeFi exchange, that is like a real expression of the value more so than the price. And so things like, showing the depth chart of an NFT, that's like an example of something we could potentially show. And so that in some ways that enhances our ability to express liquidity, but in other ways that's like complicated, it's confusing, it's very financial, and it doesn't necessarily fit in the context of like, I just want to listen to a music app and explore a collection. And so there's a lot of these trade-offs that we have to explore in terms of like how we're expressing and visualizing the financial component. And one thing we've explored is, maybe you can, like, in the Spinamp app, shift from like a speculator mode to a listener mode. And in the speculator mode, like, we get into all of this crap, and in the listener mode, you don't. And maybe a long time in the future, as we mature, we'll have like scope and capacity to do something like that. But finding a middle ground, between both is like definitely a challenge, both for us and I think for everyone else in the space. And I think, like solving for us, I think the shorter to medium term, it still feels more important to really like solve the social layer, the interaction layer, the communication layer, and like the curation and experience as a stepping stone before we get into some of these dynamics around liquidity, because really, like, liquidity emerges through all of those things. It emerges through curation and social and the content. So if we can really solve easy ways of like exposing and exploring the social and the contextual layer, then that will naturally tie into exposing the financial layer.
Yeah, I think there's so many places to take that. I would say that this is where most of the gaps in the market currently exist for me. I think first and foremost, how do you get people to collect these songs? That's the most obvious question that I think everyone's trying to figure out right now. There's a song, you can collect it. How do you get people to push that button? I think that from there, though, and this is kind of why SoundSwap was exciting as a principle to me, is how do you unlock more efficient liquidity for these markets? If I buy a song, how do I know that I can actually sell it? How do I know that there's going to be someone that's either willing to buy it off me, or how do I trade it into a pool where I know that I can get a price for it? And I think a lot of the reason why, Uniswap and DeFi Summer and some of these early markets started to emerge is that it was very efficient. You didn't need to ask permission to be able to sell these tokens. You didn't need to go and find a buyer for it. There was all of these incentives around providing liquidity to allow people to make these markets. But to your point, I think one of the bigger challenges with this is that making a financialized infrastructure like DeFi actually palatable for someone in music is very complicated. If you tried to explain to a music collector what it meant to add liquidity to a Uniswap V3 pool and set the ranges on the different prices, like, that would be completely over their head, And so I think that one of the big opportunities that Spinamp has, and what I alluded to earlier with composability, is it's how do you take this principle of providing liquidity to a collector and build that into a product in such a way where they don't need to understand how liquidity works to be able to participate and see the benefits from having liquidity in the first place.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that's a big challenge for the space. And I think there are some fundamental challenges there, right? Like, if someone doesn't understand liquidity, they're fundamentally at a disadvantage in the market to someone who does. And so by providing tools to people that they can use without understanding, in a way, you have to be very careful about how you're doing that to not put them at a disadvantage. And an interesting example of that is like an index fund. Like, if you look at the Vanguard index funds that now everyone invests in, that is one example that kind of worked for giving people a way to participate in the financial markets without necessarily deeply understanding them. I'd say that that's a similar analogy to a lot of the like Uniswap V2 style, AMM farming stuff that people did, where there was a lot of opportunity during DeFi summer and when things were already hyped in the bull market around being able to just like dump your liquidity into Uniswap V2 and get a response. But with the transition to Uniswap V3 and with like more efficiency coming to the market, that's not necessarily the case anymore. And you're back in a position where in order to actually like get financial value, you have to actually understand the market. SoundSwap is an interesting case because it's like allowing music NFTs to reach that Uniswap V2 style stage where it's fairly simple. There's kind of, you don't need to understand ranges and dynamics to participate. You can potentially buy some NFTs and just resell them later. And so I'm like really excited to see if that can take off and lead somewhere. But on one hand, so on one hand, there's a lot of promise to that. But on the other hand, it also goes against a lot of these qualities that NFTs have around being very subjective, being like actually non-fungible, and we're shifting like between fungibility and non-fungibility, where with a market that doesn't have the scale to be able to support it yet. And so it's still like an open question for me around which of these techniques is actually going to lead to kind of scaling. I mean, what it really comes down to is like demand. And I think the most important thing is demand. We can talk about like market tools and like DeFi hacks and, Ponzi-nomics to bring something to life. But like longer term, what really matters is there needs to be demand for these NFTs, and people need to really care about having them. And speculation and the potential to make a profit is one aspect of the demand. And for that, I think we can look to a lot of DeFi techniques and like these liquidity topics. But I think there also needs to be a key piece of demand that is not dependent on speculation, and like that there's value that people have in owning these NFTs that's separate from the speculative value that they may have. And so that's where this whole like culture of collecting that we've tried to bring to life in the music NFT movement comes from. And, with the stuff that Sound's doing around like highlighting collectors and showing and getting people to care about like their collection and value their collection because of how it contextualizes them and contextualizes other, I think is like another key missing piece that adds like kind of a fundamental base layer on which potentially some speculation could live. If you have speculation without like strong fundamental base layers, then it can be a bit of like a house of cards. And so and it still feels like to me that like we should be putting more effort into like really growing that culture and strengthening that culture so that base layer is solid enough that speculation can like sprout from it.
That's right. And I think that's a really good way of phrasing it too, is that it really is kind of a balancing act, right? You need to have, people who are really passionate about it and collecting out of the pure love and support of the music. But then you also need to have people that are willing to provide liquidity to a market. And I think in a lot of ways, when I focus on saying that collectors need to make money, artists need to make money, I think that a lot of times we forget about how important it is for just the true patrons to be able to show up and support. But what I think we're seeing right now is that for people who are only showing up and supporting because they love the music, in the absence of there being a real market for it, it becomes very difficult to sustain these behaviors. You almost need to have this relationship where someone who's passionate about music needs to be able to buy a song that they love and then sell it for a little bit of a profit so that they can keep collecting more music. Like it's a cycle that needs to continue within itself. And I think something that's important for the next chapter of music NFTs is recognizing that in order for this to be a healthy and sustainable market, we need to have both sides of the puzzle. And so it's important not to cater too heavily in one direction or the other, because both of those collective as a whole is what makes this be a reality and a possibility at scale in the first place.
Totally. And I think that balancing act is specifically people who get value from collecting through making a profit, as well as people who get value from collecting for having and holding the NFTs. And, there's certainly overlap where people get both, or for some period of time, people are getting value from holding the NFTs and then they sell it and they make a profit. But I think for like a long-term sustainable market, you need a critical mass of people that actually get value from just having the NFT long-term without the expectation that they're going to need to sell it. Because, financial markets are zero-sum. If someone's making money, then someone's losing money. And so you need to have the people that are losing money, that are happy that they're losing money, and that are willing to continue losing money. And that would be, patronage is a really simple example of that. If people are patrons and they're supporting the artists, and they know that, maybe I'm buying and selling music NFTs, but my like actual portfolio and my portfolio value is kind of stable, but I'm not really looking to ever sell it and get a profit. And like the royalties that I'm losing out on every time I'm paying a video going to the artist, and I feel like I'm supporting the artist and being a patron there, then that's like an example of a kind of persona, I suppose, which is helping fill the side of the market that's losing money, because they're getting value out of patronage. They're getting value out of knowing that when the artist releases new music, they have actually brought that music into existence by helping to fund the artist. And so the value that they're getting is also like new music coming out. And I think, having that balance between people who are consciously and thoughtfully, intentionally willing to lose money because they're getting value from other aspects of participating in the system is like the one side of the balancing act, as opposed to the like speculators. And like people can shift roles, people can shift between the two or have a hybrid of the back and forth. But you definitely need like people in the market to there are going to be people in the market that fall more heavily on the losing money side. And so we need to make sure that those people are getting value in non-monetary ways, and continuing to get value in non-monetary ways. And I don't think that's a problem. We already do have that. there are a lot of patrons in the market. There are a lot of people that get value because of the social aspect of NFTs. They come to house parties that music NFT collectors throw. They get concert tickets. They get whatever. And so I think we're seeing like a healthy amount of both sides of the market, but they need to scale together side by side.
Yeah, and I think something I've been thinking about is how do NFTs make your life easier or more convenient? And I think right now in a lot of ways, collecting is a fun social signal. You can build a brand and a reputation around it. You can come to collector parties like you were mentioning. That's a very good use of music NFTs. But I think one thing that it currently does not have fully baked in and ingrained yet is, I don't love the word utility, but it's just kind of like, what does this NFT get me? How does this NFT actually make my life easier? How does it make it more convenient? How do I skip the line on a bunch of bots that are trying to buy Taylor Swift tickets? How do I go and actually get merch ahead of someone else? Or how do I listen to this music earlier on? And I think that layer around sort of the access that the NFT grants you is something that's also really worth exploring. But I don't know, I guess for me, if I had to just like be very opinionated here, I would say that what I've noticed in crypto is it typically is some form of like a meme Ponzi-nomic game that gets a bunch of new liquidity into a market. And I think even if we figure out the most optimal way to use an NFT to unlock some crazy social experience, I really do think it's going to be a viral song or a viral market that's going to actually bring a bunch of new interest into it. And then from there, I think you start to build the social layers on top of it. I mean, even if you look at like CryptoPunks or Bored Apes or anything like this, they honestly didn't become cool until they started to be perceived as valuable. And I think in a lot of ways, what we need to do with music NFTs is first prove that these collections are valuable and that they have historical significance. And then once there's kind of an acknowledgement that these actually have an inherent value to them, I think on the back of that, then we can start to figure out what those more social rewards experiences are that help to kind of give validity to the collections beyond the financial value itself.
For sure. And I think like back to your point of like, it being almost a game that people are playing, I think that's an important piece because playing a game is something that's inherently valuable for a lot of people. They get value out of it. If you look at like the DeFi world, a lot of people participate in DeFi because they enjoy it. Sure, like they're making money and making profit, but like the excitement and the enjoyment of the game is a big part of the experience. And so, that can obviously become unhealthy at times, like in the gambling world, but there are a lot of people that do it in a healthy way where, you playing the game so that you can keep playing the game. If you look at like one thing I've been paying a little bit of attention to the last few weeks is like the on-chain gaming and the autonomous worlds movement. And like one of the big philosophies there is like you play the game so that you can unlock the ability to keep playing the game. And that's the purpose. That's the value that you get. And it's like you're playing an infinite game because the value that you're getting out of it is enjoyment and ongoing ability to play and participate in the game and participate in the movement. And I think like, if we take that back to the music NFT world, that's something we already actually even see today. A lot of people there that are collecting music NFTs today, they've become part of the game. They have a community. They are engaging with artists, engaging with other collectors, and they're getting intrinsic value out of that. And sometimes that's even enough to add a fundamental side of value to the market that adds another like level of cement to the base layer. And so enhancing that game of like collecting and playing music NFTs and being part of the communities and having social collaboration and interaction through them, I think is like a piece that directly ties into the same processes which allowed like Bored Apes and the music NFT collections to like really explode and come to life because they had a lot of those elements of like a fun base layer game that people enjoyed playing and continually playing.
I absolutely love that. And I think the one transition I've been noticing lately, at least in my personal experience on like the narrative side, is that I think we're moving away from like NFTs as kind of the category buzzword to, at least in my mind, I've been using this word on-chain a lot more. And I think it's really important to highlight this because when people think about NFTs, they think about Bored Apes, they think about JPEGs, they think about $100,000, avatars. But I think when you use the word on-chain, it kind of flips the dynamic on what that means. I think to me, being on-chain, and, Jacob from Zora put out an amazing post about this recently that I'd highly recommend reading. But, it's an acknowledgement into this future ecosystem and economy. And I think specifically when you look at music that exists on chain, songs aren't selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Songs are selling for $5. You know what I mean? And I think that the game that's being played there is not to have the one rarest song that defines you and your identity as a whole, which is kind of what we saw with CryptoPunks and Bored Apes, et cetera. It's almost the culmination of your collective identity. It's the fact that you have 100 songs and that you've supported 50 artists and that you have this sort of identity that spans across a wide variety of different communities and different ecosystems. And so I think the biggest thing to highlight there is that this transition to on-chain, I think, is going to be really important to the future progression of music NFTs, because in a world where we're buying NFTs for $5 on a layer 2 for less than $1 with a credit card, I think it really changes the dynamic of what the game is that's meant to be played. And I think for someone like myself, when people ask me, why do you care so much about music NFTs? Why is this something that you're so passionate about? It's that, it's being able to explore an entirely net new playbook and say NFTs as a proof of concept started as these really high value, scarce digital assets, but there's going to be trillions of NFTs in the world. There's going to be trillions of things that you can collect. And I think being able to build games and social experiences around, just collecting at scale, I think that that's really the meta that I'm most excited and focused on. And I think that it's something that we're both very aligned with in terms of the work that you're doing with Spinamp.
Totally. And I think that's like, in talking about this balancing act between people that lose money and people that make money in a speculator's market. Playing that game can fulfill the losing money side of the market in a healthy way, where if I'm spending $20, $30 a month collecting 20 or 30 songs, and slowly over the course of the year building up a collection, the value that I'm getting out of that in building my collection and having like this cool thing to show off is intrinsic already. And at least obviously I'm speaking subjectively, but I'm sure this is true for a lot of people, where that's like a cost that if I don't end up ever selling any of those NFTs and I don't participate in the specular market at all, I'm still getting value over it and I can still keep playing it continually. And as a side effect, I'm supporting the losing side of the market and essentially opening up the speculator market because there's a lot more room for it to grow because there's more of the losing side to balance. And so that's why I like some of these analogies around like on-chain games and around cheaper NFTs because they also feel like a potential path to unlock a speculator. And so kind of ironically, it may be the case that these like more widespread, cheaper, abundant NFTs unlock the ability for like these crazy one-of-one catalog NFTs to kind of grow and create speculative value and like to become valued because they kind of rise the tide of the loser's side of the market that may be capable of being filled up by the real scarce like high art side of the market.
That's right. And I think in a lot of ways, that's actually what boxed out a lot more people from collecting in the last bull market was that it was just too expensive, especially with gas being $50 per transaction and your average NFT being 1 ETH, which at, a certain point in time was $4,000. Most people just couldn't play. And I think that in a lot of ways that dopamine came from the ability to make so much money so fast. But I think the Trojan horse about music NFTs is that you can start playing the game for $5, but you can also play the game with $10,000, and I think to your point about creating an efficient market for it, something that I've been noticing is the ability to buy 100 editions of a given song and spend, 0.1 ETH on it. That doesn't box out someone from coming in and buying one edition of that same song for $5. And I think when you start to pair this idea of there being the average fan who's spending $5, $10 a month on music, which doesn't feel unrealistic. That's basically what they're doing on Spotify now, with some of these, we'll call them super fans, super collectors, whether it's hedge funds, equity funds, whatever it might be. You can have this balanced relationship where someone's spending $50,000 a month on music and someone's spending $5 a month on music. And I think when you put both those people into the same pool, it creates these really interesting dynamics. And I think that for me personally, I'm just excited to see what that looks like at scale, because I think that a public market for every song in the world where you have a collection that you're really excited about, that you can trade with your friends and sell to make some money on the side, it's a really beautiful philosophy and something that I really do think that we're headed towards.
Totally. And I think a lot of the initial like motivation and discussion of music NFTs, even before they started, was around this idea of like, hey, I have a unique taste in music. I'm like a super hipster. I discovered this artist early. My collection is like my identity. I should be able to kind of really double down on this and feel like, hey, I can, succeed because I have this like special hipster curated taste. Was like a story that drew a lot of people into the music NFT collecting movement. And I think, if we can build a healthy market that has these different personas to support this kind of story, I think, that is a piece of really like unlocking that original motivation that a lot of people had for how music NFTs like originally got started.
I love that. And I feel like this is a good place for us to wrap up at. I feel like we covered everything from Spinamp as a listening product to Spinamp as something that's going to be able to allow artists to use it more thoroughly, to talking about the raise and then what's coming next with sort of the future of the music NFT ecosystem. So I guess just sort of a closing thought here. How should people be thinking about Spinamp today when they're listening to this episode? And what's the best place for them to get more involved with the ecosystem as a whole?
Yeah, so if you're listening to this episode on Spinamp, that would be the most awesome thing. It's going to go live on Spinamp in about a week. And So that's the number one place. If you haven't, then go to www.spinamp.xyz. And from there, you can either get the app on Android, on iOS, or on your computer. It's cross-platform, download it. And when you start using it, I'd say like the feature that we think is going to be valuable and important and kind of evolve longer term is really building your collection, collecting music, favoriting songs, following artists, building up social connections, and seeing how those things evolve over time. And those efforts that you put into like really caring about your music taste and your profile and who you collect and who you follow really are like the starting point for the evolution of the social game that we imagine music NFTs are going to evolve to, as all of these platforms start to kind of think about these things and help unlock these pieces of the market.
Yeah, that's right. And shout out Spinamp for being the place where we debut all of our podcasts. It's the place that we've, first premiered our first episode on Invest in Music, made a custom theme for it. You can collect all of our episodes through it. So you've been an incredible partner for us on this episode, and I'm really excited to be supporting you in your next journey. And I'm just really excited that people got the chance to learn more about Spinamp because it's something that I'm personally really, really stoked about.
Same, likewise. Awesome being on the podcast and great catching up.
Cool, man. Well, thank you for your time, Aidan. Once again, this is Aidan from Spinamp, and we'll see you guys again for another episode very, very soon.